Something is coming out of Las Vegas right now that I have been trying to find the right words for, and I want to be upfront with you about why that is harder than it sounds. I have covered enough NFL offseasons to carry a healthy amount of scar tissue from manufactured optimism. I know what it looks like when the press conference language is doing all the heavy lifting and the actual football evidence underneath is too thin to support the weight being placed on it. I have watched enough, and I tell you that what I have been watching come out of Raiders rookie minicamp has genuinely shifted something in how I think about this. Something real is happening in that desert facility, and I want to walk through exactly what I have seen and exactly why I cannot stop thinking about it. Let me start with Fernando Mendoza, because every honest conversation about what is happening in Las Vegas right now has to start there. Number 15, silver and black. Standing on that practice field with the settled, purposeful energy of a player who has a clear and specific relationship with the moment he finds, always available and never entirely wrong. It is May. The pass rush is not live. The consequences of any individual decision are theoretical. The conditions are as controlled and forgiving as they get at any point in a professional football calendar. I know all of that. And I also know that when you have watched enough quarterbacks move through fundamental work in this kind of environment, you develop a real and reliable sense of what the foundation looks like before the competitive weight of a full season starts pressing down on it. What I saw in Mendoza's foundation made me feel something I genuinely have not felt watching a Raiders quarterback in years. The ball placement was consistent in the way that only comes from authentic accuracy rather than favorable drill design. The throws had intention and crispness to them. The way he moved through timing routes and basic offensive concepts, even at this earliest and most elementary stage of professional football, carried the signature of a quarterback who has genuinely processed this game at a high level for a sustained period and brought that processing with him into a new environment. There is a quality to watching a truly gifted quarterback operate through foundational material that is difficult to put precise language around but immediately identifiable once you have spent enough time watching its absence in players who do not have it. Mendoza has it. It showed up on that practice field, and it has not left my mind since. But here is where this story goes somewhere that I think genuinely separates it from the comfortable spring optimism I have been trained to distrust. Reports have surfaced about what Mendoza does after the practice day ends, not what he does in front of cameras, not what he does when the organizational machinery of an NFL minicamp is running and the accountability structures are external and visible, what he does when the workday is technically over and the most natural thing in the world would be to go back to his room and let his body and his mind recover for the next morning. He has been working through under-center snaps with the offensive linemen and centers in the evening, 25 to 50 additional reps per night, grinding through the specific mechanical and timing elements of a skill set that was flagged early in his pre-draft evaluation process as something that required professional development coming out of his college system. He is doing this voluntarily. He is doing it without cameras present. He is doing it as the first overall pick in the NFL draft, which is a designation that has historically come with an implicit license to lean on the credibility of the selection itself and let the organization's investment in you do a certain amount of the public relations work. He is not using that license, not even slightly. He addressed it directly when he spoke to reporters, and the way he talked about it is the detail I keep returning to. He acknowledged with complete openness that this is a real area requiring real work. He talked about how the process with the centers has been collaborative and genuinely productive. He made it clear, without prompting and without any visible discomfort about the admission, that the development is ongoing and happening every day, regardless of who is or is not watching. I want to stay with that for a moment because I think it reveals something important about this specific human being that no amount of film study or athletic testing or pre-draft evaluation can fully capture. Under center work is not a talent problem, it is a repetition problem, a muscle memory problem, a problem that has exactly one solution, which is the unglamorous, unobservable, increment by increment physical and mechanical work of doing it thousands of times until the body stops thinking about it consciously and starts executing it automatically. That is not interesting work. It does not generate highlights. It does not produce content that trends anywhere. A 22-year-old who has just been selected first overall in the NFL draft, sitting in a hotel doing extra snaps in the evening because he identified a gap between where he is and where he needs to be, is showing you his competitive DNA in the clearest possible terms. What a player does when nobody is keeping score tells you everything about what they will do when everyone is. Then came the moment from his media availability that I think deserves its own real consideration, separate from the football evaluation. Mendoza was asked about potentially attending the White House ceremony celebrating the Indiana National Championship. His college teammates are going. He has every social right, every human justification, and more than enough organizational goodwill built up to attend that event without a single person in that building holding it against him. His answer was essentially this: as a rookie, as someone entering a professional hierarchy at the lowest rung of it regardless of draft position, choosing a personal occasion over team obligations would not reflect who he wants to be in this building right now. He talked about being in a position where his job is to serve the people around him through consistent presence and consistent work. He is the first overall pick. He just won a national championship. He has more accumulated public goodwill than almost any young player entering professional football at this moment, and he is voluntarily choosing to define himself through humility and availability rather than through the status his selection would easily justify. I have been around enough of these situations to know how rare that actually is. Talent is not rare at the professional level because the evaluation process filters for it with extraordinary precision. Reasonable work ethic among talented players is common because most people who reach this level got there partly by outworking someone else. But genuine humility in a first overall pick, the kind that shapes actual daily decisions rather than the kind that gets performed at press conferences and then abandoned in private, that is uncommon in a way that matters enormously, because the player who keeps choosing work over recognition in May is the same player who keeps making the right competitive choices in November when the season is heavy and the shortcuts start presenting themselves and the character of a roster gets revealed by how it responds to pressure. What Mendoza is showing in these first weeks is not just a football foundation, it is a character profile. And that profile is going to serve this franchise for a long time if the football develops the way the early evidence suggests it can. Let me shift to German McCoy, because his presence at Minicamp generated a conversation that I think deserves more careful handling than it received in most places. He did not participate on day one. He came out in a limited capacity on day two, and the instinct when you see a player working through drills with a known medical situation attached to them is to focus on the limitation. What I want you to focus on instead is the specific nature of what he was doing when he was on the field. Punt return drills. And there is a piece of straightforward medical and organizational logic that applies here that I do not think got adequate attention. You do not put a player with a surgically significant knee situation through the physical demands of return specialist work unless the medical staff responsible for protecting his long-term health has real evidence-based confidence in where his body is right now. The risk-reward calculation does not allow for it. The liability exposure does not allow for it. The organizational responsibility to a player under contract does not allow for it. The fact that the Raiders were comfortable enough with McCoy's current physical status to let him participate in those specific drills is itself meaningful medical information, regardless of what the most alarming reports suggested when his situation first became public. The surgery is still part of the conversation. That reality has not disappeared. But the timing question around when that procedure needs to happen appears to carry more flexibility than the initial coverage implied. And that flexibility, combined with the Raiders' demonstrated willingness to let him participate, opens a genuine and substantive conversation about whether McCoy is available in some meaningful capacity this season. And if that availability is real, even in a limited form, the roster implications connect directly to the central argument for why smart draft evaluation produces durable competitive advantages that do not show up in depth chart conversations, but absolutely show up in results by mid-season. McCoy's talent profile before the medical concerns emerged was that of a top corner prospect. The medical concerns drove him to the 4th round. If those concerns are less immediately serious than feared, the Raiders may have acquired starter caliber ability at a fraction of the draft capital that ability would have cost in a clean evaluation environment. That is not luck. That is research. That is the kind of organizational intelligence that separates front offices that consistently outperform their draft position from front offices that do not. Kairen Crawford's absence from day 2 of practice is worth addressing directly because the kind of alarm that absence generated in some corners of the coverage was not warranted by the actual facts of the situation. The coaching staff made a workload management decision. Crawford had a significant day on Friday. The staff pulled his reps on Saturday as a responsible protective measure in a non-contact minicamp environment, Where accumulating unnecessary physical stress on a young player's body serves no real competitive purpose. That is not a red flag. That is exactly the kind of thoughtful, long-view roster management you want to see from a staff that is making a genuine developmental investment in a player they believe in. The absence tells you nothing useful about Crawford's trajectory. What tells you something useful is what he said when he stood at the podium after practice. He talked about being a violent and physical player, which is the correct self-description for an edge rusher at any level of professional football who wants to communicate why he belongs. He talked about learning from the veterans ahead of him, specifically about approaching every available rep as an educational opportunity rather than a performance showcase. He talked about being an attacker, about bringing genuine disruptive intent to every single snap, regardless of the competitive context of the moment. That combination of physical aggression and intellectual honesty about the size of the developmental gap between where he is and where the professional position demands he eventually arrive is exactly the mentality that separates edge rushers who develop into real contributors from edge rushers who have similar physical tools but never translate them into consistent NFL production. Players who arrive at the professional level believing they already know how to win get exposed quickly and take the longest to adjust. Crawford is coming in with his eyes genuinely open about what has to be learned, and he has the physical foundation and the apparent attitude to learn it at the pace this level demands. Rob Leonard is going to have real material to work with. The early signs suggest Crawford understands that being receptive to coaching is the foundational requirement before any of the technical refinement can begin to stick. Mike Washington showed up in the running back footage in a way that caught my attention for a specific reason that I want to try to articulate carefully. There is a real distinction that matters enormously in evaluating running backs at this stage of their professional introduction, and it is the difference between athleticism that is compensating for technical deficiencies and athleticism that exists on top of a technically sound movement foundation. The first kind looks explosive in limited contexts and breaks down under defensive sophistication. The second kind looks comfortable and natural across a range of situations because the technique is doing the work it is supposed to do, and the athleticism is operating on top of a stable base rather than underneath an unstable one. What I saw from Washington in the available footage suggested the second thing. The fluidity in his movement through fundamental sequences, the quickness that appeared without looking forced, the way he processed basic concepts without the mechanical self-consciousness that marks players who have not yet internalized what they are being asked to do, all of it pointed toward a back whose physical gifts are genuine and durable, rather than situational. For a player with genuine home run speed to also look naturally comfortable in foundational movement, work is an encouraging early indicator of how that talent might translate as the competitive environment intensifies. Ray McCloud working with the rookies in the receiver drills is a detail that speaks to something broader about the competitive environment the Raiders are creating throughout this roster, and I think it deserves to be understood in that broader context. The receiver room in Las Vegas right now has genuine competition happening throughout it. There are players competing for spots with real overlap in their skill profiles, and nobody in that room has a guaranteed path to the final roster based on reputation or prior organizational investment alone. McCloud's presence in those drills communicates several things simultaneously about how this staff is approaching the competitive evaluation. He is being taken seriously as a candidate, not just going through professional courtesy motions at the tail end of a career. His background as a legitimate return specialist at the NFL level gives him a specific and differentiated value argument in a competition where generic receiver depth does not separate anyone from the field in a meaningful way. And his willingness to work alongside players who are many years younger and at very different stages of their professional development says something about where his competitive orientation is right now. The roster decision will follow the competition honestly, which is exactly how it should work. Now let me say something about the broader atmosphere coming out of that Las Vegas facility, because I think it is ultimately the most important thing I can communicate, and it is also the hardest thing to capture through the accumulation of individual player details and individual quotes. There is a different quality to what is happening in that building, and I have been around enough of these situations to feel the difference between something structural and something manufactured. Clint Kubiak has established a philosophical foundation for this organization that has actual observable teeth. The standard he put in place from the first day of the first practice, where earned distinction separates players from each other in ways that are real and visible and not negotiable based on where someone was drafted or what their contract says about their value, is the kind of standard that changes daily behavior because players can see it operating in real time, rather than just hearing about it in meetings where the accountability exists only in theory. The Shield policy is not a marketing campaign. It is a daily visible reminder of what this coaching staff actually believes about how organizational culture gets built. And it is shaping how players in that building relate to their own work in ways that are going to compound over the course of an entire season. And at the center of all of it, every single day, is a 22-year-old who is choosing to spend his evenings taking extra snaps in a hotel when he could reasonably be doing almost anything else with his time and his status, who stood in front of reporters and declined a White House visit because attending it did not fit his honest understanding of who he wants to be in this building right now, who acknowledged a mechanical development area with complete openness and described the collaborative work he is doing to address it without any visible discomfort about the admission, who carries himself on the practice field with the settled purpose of a player who knows exactly why he is there and exactly what the work requires of him on a daily basis. I have been waiting for something real in Las Vegas for a long time, and I want to be transparent about the weight that statement carries for me personally, given how many false starts I have watched this franchise move through. The scars from previous cycles of hope and disappointment are real, and they do not disappear because the early evidence looks different this time. But the early evidence does look genuinely different in the specific and observable ways that matter rather than in the rhetorical ways that tend to evaporate under competitive pressure. The quarterback fits the system in the organic way that produces durable performance rather than the constructed way that looks functional in April and shows its seams by October. The head coach has a clear philosophical identity and the organizational alignment to act on it without compromise. The front office is making patient, disciplined decisions that reflect a long-term structural vision rather than the reactive desperation that has produced short-term cosmetic improvements and long-term competitive damage in previous iterations of this franchise. What happens between now and September will tell the real story. It always does. But everything coming out of those first days of genuine competitive evaluation points in the same direction, toward a foundation that is more structurally sound than anything Las Vegas has had in a very long time, built around a quarterback who is earning the franchise designation one quiet evening in a hotel, one humble press conference answer, one deliberate and unobserved choice of work over recognition at a time. That is Fernando Mendoza, and that is what the beginning of something real looks like before the results make it obvious to everyone who was not paying close enough attention to see it coming.